you?
I am well.
Very nice to meet you.
Oh, it's nice
Welcome.
to meet you as well. Thank you so much. We're excited to be here.
Travels have been good. We came up Saturday and just been kind of checking the place out and seeing if she likes it. So.
What do you think?
I think it's beautiful. I keep saying we're going to the beach. We're going to the beach. But I think we'll have to go to the beach on Wednesday.
You know what's so funny is that I came from New York and I kept thinking,
Hey.
but I am on the water.
Oh, well, I mean, I just seeing it. I spent a bit of my childhood in Maine, and just being surrounded by all of the water like heals my heart.
Yeah.
And so in the Midwest, I felt like I was drowning without having water.
No, it's good. It's good to be on the coast.
It is. I feel like I've been called back. So
Good.
It is exciting. I know we want to look around some more and adventure, but so far I think Sarasota is kind of perfect. So
Good.
other than traffic, the traffic has been
The traffic is.
has been a bit.
I've only been here for 6 years and traffic has intensified.
Oh, all of the people wanting to join.
I want to go north and south.
Okay.
What way to go if you're in the
Are you? Yeah. In the green light major. Check it.
1 minute. I'm too tall. Welcome back and good afternoon. We are reconvening our interviews for our superintendent finalists. Welcome, Dr. Phillips. We have Dr. Phillips with us today, and we will convene the same round of questions in the same circulation, for lack of a better term. And let's see here. So we'll go till around a hard stop at 3:30, but I like to give you 15 minutes to close or ask us any questions that you may have. So again, thank you so much for your interest and for being here today. We're going to start with Mrs. Rose.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Dr. Phillips. Thank you for being here. What specific attributes or skills do you bring to Sarasota County that makes you the most qualified for this position?
Got it. Thank you for the question. Can you hear me okay?
We have Craig Manilli, yeah.
All right.
So the light blue, or light green.
Yep.
Green light, sorry.
How about now? Better? Okay. All right, great. So when looking at my skill set and why I believe that I'm the best candidate for Sarasota County Schools, I think starting off it comes down to fit. Looking at Sarasota County Schools and looking for what you need in the next leader to come here, I really believe that there's two main important ingredients that are needed in leadership. The first and foremost is educational leadership. And when we talk about educational leadership, we're really talking about the blend of instructional leadership. So how does teaching and learning occur? What leadership is happening out in our schools? But it's also that blend with the operational leadership. How does the entire ecosystem and organism of the school district operate, and how can we leverage efficiencies and effectiveness on the operational side and make our operations as great as possible so that we can have maximum impact into the classroom and on the teaching and learning side. Looking at my background, you'll see that I have a strong military leadership background. I came in as an E1 in the military. I worked my way up to E6 or staff sergeant, and then I was commissioned as a commissioned officer in the military. Throughout that background, I've worked in artillery, I've worked in intelligence, counterintelligence, IT, HR, operations. I've served as an executive officer. I've served as a chief of staff, a commander, chief of HR, and a chief of IT. So you'll see there that there's a pretty strong operational background and understanding how an organization has to function. I've also owned and successfully exited two businesses throughout my career. One was a bakery that I owned with my wonderful wife over there, and she doesn't like to say that she was on Cupcake Wars and did pretty good, but she did. And the other was a corporate housing company that we had nationwide with a very successful exit on that as well. After that, I ended up retiring from the military. My original dream, my plan, my goal in life was to be a lifelong military guy and retire as a general. That got cut short, and my plans had to change in 2012 when I was injured in Afghanistan and ended up going through 2 years of surgeries and physical therapy at Fort Riley, Kansas. And I had to find a new dream in life. I had to figure out a new mission, a new purpose for why I was put here, and I found it in education. So I ended up working in my children's school district in the IT shop, and I found out I was in a whole entirely new world. And while I was an expert at Army, education was very, very different. And in order to learn that world, I decided I was going to go get my doctorate in educational leadership. So I signed up, I made it into a program, a really great program in educational leadership, and through that, and through my experiences in education, I was able to start to leverage and learn educational leadership, the instructional side, the teaching and learning, when we talk about tiers, when we talk about MTSS, when we talk about RTI, when we talk about reading and interventions. I learned all that, and I got to apply fixes and solutions to move the needle in all those areas. But I also got to learn how to leverage the wonderful experiences that I had learned throughout all the avenues of my career and how to make that work together with the instructional side in order to make maximum impact on teaching and learning. And so with that, I've been able to, with those skills, do some amazing work. Been able to, at Kansas City Public Schools, we were able to regain state accreditation. So accreditation's a little bit different in Missouri. It's not through Cognia. The state actually does it. When I got to Kansas City Public Schools, we hadn't been accredited in decades, and it wasn't even a hope or a prayer for us to get accreditation. Being in the CIO seat gave me the perspective that nobody else gets to see except the superintendent. As a CIO, I get to look at the technology and make sure that we're innovating, but I also get to work with every single cabinet member, every single department, every single leader throughout the district to make sure that we're moving the needle for kids. So we're able to use that perspective and really bring in data to move the needle. And within my first year at KCPS, working hand in hand with the rest of cabinet, we were able to score the highest on APR, which is how Missouri scores. We were able to score the highest out of 30 years within 1 year of making sure that we're making the operational changes along with the instructional changes. So with all of that, I really feel that where Sarasota is right now, there's some pretty good teaching and learning happening. I would say that I'm a little concerned when I look at proficiency rates, and that drives me down to Tier 1 instruction and really seeing that if our proficiency rates that are showing up in the testing is really what it is, then I'm a little bit concerned with how Tier 1 instruction is happening. But I'm also concerned on the operational side of the house. One concern I have is where safety and security reports, for example. If safety and security is our top priority, I believe it should report directly to the superintendent. So there's just some other opportunities and things like that I think that really bringing in the various lenses that I've experienced throughout my career makes me the best candidate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, and it's not so much a follow-up on this one. I do want to elaborate because I did, and we've had gratefully lots of public feedback throughout the last process. And certainly, and you did touch upon it with the educational, instructional leadership and operational. And I want to give you the opportunity through these questions to highlight that component of instructional leadership having not been in the classroom. And again, I think it perhaps may come out through some of these questions, but I do think it's an important area that you potentially could either help us understand a little bit better. Moving next to Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Trust is an important ingredient in leadership. How would you build trust with internal and external stakeholders and the groups that they might represent? Please provide a few examples.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Edwards. For me, trust comes down to the two types of trust that I believe in. The first type is you can trust me to be a good person and to do what I say I'm going to do. You can trust that my motivations come from where I say that they come from. And so when I make decisions, whether they're agreed with or not, you can believe that I make them from the place that I say I'm making them from, right? The second type of trust is that you can effectively operate and get things done that you say you're going to get done. So I think we can all think of people that we think of that they're really great people, but they're just not effective in getting work done. And then there's people that can get amazing work done and nobody likes them. And so when we look at trust, it really takes those two types. And doing that as a leader can be a little bit challenging. We have internal stakeholders. We have external stakeholders. We have community groups. We have groups that disagree with each other in Sarasota. And so understanding that my role as superintendent is to build both types of trust with each and every group out there. And if I'm doing my job properly, nobody's going to like every decision that I make. And that's just the way that being a superintendent is. It's just the part of the job. But you can believe in me and how I make my decisions and that I do it in a way that you can trust. And so while we might disagree and you might not like everything I do, you can say, okay, Dr. Phillips made the decision. We know how he uses data in his decisions, how he's objective, and what his decision-making process is. I trust him as a good person. I trust him to be effective, and that's how I would go about that. I can talk about, and it's in my 90-day plan, meeting with different stakeholders and all that, but the truth of the matter is when it comes to trust, that first type of trust, I have to show you that I do what I say I'm going to do. And the second type of trust, I still have to show you that I can achieve what I say I'm going to achieve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Enos.
How have you led significant change in your previous positions? What elements need to be included in change initiatives to offer reasonable opportunities for success? How will these changes be evaluated? Please provide an example in your experience.
All right. Thank you for the question, Mr. Enos. So change is it's tough and it never stops, especially in a school district. And I think that we can look at the way that education is evolving right now. We can see what's happening with technology on the horizon. We can see what's happening with teaching and learning and instruction on the horizon. And they're going to end up meeting in the middle. Change is going to keep coming. In order to work with change, I've invented a process that I call PTAC. So it's P-I-T-A-C. P is for planning, and that's really identifying those problems of practice and those proposed solutions. So it's the work of figuring out the what. What is it that is the problem? What is it that we need to do or accomplish? The I is implementation. Starting with the I is where we start with the how, and the how is where plans start to degrade, and we start to get to impediments that pop up. We start to get to the feedback versus pushback continuum, and we start to hit walls of resistance that we might need to adjust our plans or start to push through. But implementation is when we take that proposed solution and we start to apply it. After implementation, we have transition. That transition is when we start to look at where the onus needs to shift to for the implementation of the change itself. So if we want to use the example of Science of Reading in Orton-Gillingham and our elementary schools, we can have the problem of practice, which is our third grade reading scores. We can have the proposed solution is we want to train all of our teachers on Science of Reading, phonics, and Orton-Gillingham. And then we have the implementation, which is what's the training plan? What's the communication plan? How are we going to measure success? Which is, I believe in stock takes along the way. So If you look at fast testing, that's 3 stock takes a year to see how teaching and learning is doing. I believe we have to have stock takes with every change, every initiative that we have. So we don't just show up at the finish line and say, we don't know why we got here and we didn't reach the result we were going for. We can tell along the way if we're going to reach that finish line or not. Transition piece is saying, okay, we had the project team that came up with the problem of practice, the proposed solution, and the plan to implement, but now we need to shift. We're leaving that train the trainer model, and we're going to the actual people implementing and receiving and having to make sure that we're doing the work that's involved, and that's the transition. The A is for adoption. So we've done the work to get everybody on board with whatever the change is, and now we're going through and we're looking for fidelity inside of adoption. You can have everything perfect up to the A in PTAC, but if it's not adopted, if folks aren't using it, if it's not being built into teaching and learning, if it's not being built into the operational side of the house, I'll use the HR software. I know that's a big project here in Sarasota. You can buy the software, you can implement, you can train people on it, you can transition it, but if they don't use it or use it correctly or to its full capacity, why did we buy it? So that's the adoption piece, and it doesn't really matter what the change is. We have to move to the point of, is it being used? Is it solving the problem of practice that we thought it was going to solve? If not, why not, and what are we going to do about it? And then we move over to the C, which is continuous improvement. So throughout PTAC is the Plan, Do, Study, Act part of the continuous improvement model, but inside of the C of PTAC, we really look at the study through adoption, and then the act, which is where do we pivot, where do we make a change. So we've arrived at the finish line, we've gotten the thing implemented, but is it working? Are we getting the results that we set out to get? If not, why not, and what are we going to do about it? Sometimes that's making tweaks, sometimes that's going back to the drawing board and starting all over. When I look at some of the programs and things that we have in Sarasota schools right now, I think we have some that we're already to the C on, especially as we start looking at budgets, ESSER funding, choice dollars and things moving other places. We need to look at some of our programs that have made it all the way to the A and they've been adopted, but are they moving the needle? Do they survive as we go into the new budget cycles?
Thank you. Were there any follow-ups? Do you have any examples that you could use for that beyond, if you could?
Sure, absolutely. So a great thing for PTAC, I think a great example will be the work we did in Kansas City Public Schools. So in Kansas City, coming in, I already talked to you about kind of the state that the district was in, but we really had to look at things from a different lens. It wasn't just about moving the needle with teaching and learning. We had a lot of different issues and things that were going on, and so what we had to do was really think of an overall transformational leadership plan. What were we going to do to the entire district to make it better? When I got there, I went in, I met with the superintendent, and I told him, I'm looking at the strategic plan. I'm not seeing where the work that we need to do is aligning to where we need to go. And he agreed, and we were able to come up with some strategies that were a little bit different, and they were a little bit different. But overall, we had to come up with a way to get operational impact and instructional impact to work together. So I'll give you a great example of a change that we took through the PTAC cycle, and that would be breakfast in the classroom. So that's just one initiative that we were able to do at Kansas City. The way that we got to breakfast in the classroom was the teaching and learning folks saw the data that showed that if kids ate breakfast, they would perform higher. One of the challenges was when we started pushing kids through the cafeteria to get breakfast at Kansas City Public Schools, we were losing instructional time. It was taking so long to get kids through that we were losing instructional time. And so we had the plan, we had the problem of practice, and it had been implemented. But when we got to the actual adoption part and that continuous improvement part, we realized it's actually having the inverse effect of what we thought. So we did the plan's working, and then the teaching and learning folks, they really thought, okay, it doesn't work here, and they wanted to give up on the plan. When I was in that meeting, I realized that it wasn't the what, it was the how. And you'll hear me say that a lot if I become your superintendent, is we can have great blue sky thinking ideas that are the what, but the how matters. And the how for us was really, we had a new problem of practice, which was how do we get kids fed and not lose instructional time. So we went back through the PTAC cycle, and what we ended up doing was bringing in the transportation director, bringing in the custodial director, and bringing in transportation custodian, we brought those folks in, as well as the chief of operations. And we said, hey, here's our problem. We're losing instructional time, and we think we want to feed kids in the classroom. The transportation director also thought that there would be a really good opportunity to look at our routing software at that point in time, because he thought he could get kids to school faster as well. So if we got kids to school faster, we ran our routes faster, and we can get kids into the classroom, and then food service could deliver our meals to the classroom, kids could eat, and custodial could do sweeps and get rid of that trash so it's not impacting the classroom. That's one example of how we use the PTAC process. With that, we were able to see our scores dramatically increase. We got students fed, we got them in the seats, we were able to layer on more supports, new teaching methodologies, and really start to see the work that could shift the numbers for us in Kansas City.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Did you? No, it's Mrs. Marinelli. Sorry. I need to mark it down. I should do that this way.
Dr. Phillips, how would you provide leadership to foster a strong board/superintendent relationship? And how would you assist the board in reaching consensus on decisions? And how would you deal with a serious difference of opinion between you as a superintendent and the board?
Thank you for that question, Mrs. Marinelli. That's a tough one. I think that a lot of other folks would say that you have to start with trust, and I already talked about those two types of trust. And trust is very important, but I think one of the main things that's important with the superintendent and board relationship is understanding that there's clear roles and responsibilities between the two. So from my philosophy, each individual board member is a partner. You're a business partner. We go back and forth, we share ideas, we do that kind of thing. But the board corporate is my boss. And so when it comes to decision making, I think one of the worst things that a superintendent can do that I've seen is pick which board member they were going to align with and do what that board member wanted to do, or those two board members or something like that, instead of partnering with each and every board member and then board corporate being the boss and the decider. And when we look at those roles and responsibilities, we're really breaking down policy and governance versus administration. If I build up those two types of trust with each board member and the board corporate, then I should be able to be trusted with that administration part of the job. I do not and will not dabble in policy or governance as a superintendent. I'm happy to give my opinion or opine on things or give my thoughts, but when it comes to that governance and when it comes to the policy making, that's the board. And I think that it's very important for a superintendent to know the difference between those two. When we look at getting consensus between the board and I'll just say the board itself and the superintendent, how I make my decisions matters as a superintendent, and understanding that when I bring a recommendation, when I opine on something, I'm doing it based off of data, transparency. I'm not trying to hide anything or sugarcoat or whatever, and I also don't have a personal agenda other than the success of each and every one of our students. So what I've seen throughout my time in education, I think all in all, it's been a very tumultuous time in education. I think I've had 9 superintendents, if you count all the interims. And I've seen good, I've seen very, very bad superintendents. But I think staying as objective as possible and making sure that the board knows where my decisions come from and how I make them is the best thing that I can do to build consensus. Board members, if they're elected correctly, they're not always going to agree, and that's just the way that that works. It's a board, and debate is very healthy, conflict is very healthy. With the board, the thing that I would try to encourage as a superintendent, I'm the one person that can talk to each of you outside of board meetings. And so I can also maybe work to help get some understanding between 2 or more board members, have different conversations, and look at how we're moving ahead together, where 2 board members, the only way you can talk is in the public, and sometimes that's not the best way to resolve things. So offering my services as a mediator and a trusted advisor to each board member as well is what I would want to focus on.
Thank you. Similar to most districts and the country, we have significant learning gaps. How will you, as superintendent, develop strategies to improve upon the educational success of our students? Please cite an example of a strategy initiative you have either implemented or would be seeking to implement and develop here in Sarasota.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Ms. Ziegler. Looking at learning gaps, especially for Sarasota, I think we're seeing some common learning gaps that we see nationwide. We're seeing the bottom or the lowest 25%, so that lowest quartile. We're seeing reading, third grade and above. We're seeing some acceleration issues or some what might look, I'm just looking at data as an outsider, so there might be some added focus to acceleration to perhaps make up for the lowest quartile or ESE gains there. So on the academic side, those are the three things that I would want to focus on the most, as well as some other areas that I've seen in the data. The strategies that I would want to employ to come up are some that I've tried before. So in Kansas City Public Schools, and we did the same thing in Volusia County Schools, is have a data management calendar team. So while we have lots of instructional interventions that we can deploy on reading, on teaching and learning, on the bottom quartile, there's a piece of looking at the data and making sure that the data is clean and that everybody knows what's coming up. That's also very important. So in Kansas City and in Volusia, we created what's called the DMC team, where we had various stakeholders, operational and instructional, throughout the district get together every 2 weeks, and we looked at what testing is coming up, when are our surveys coming up for the state, so that we could make sure we got in and we did pre-survey audits, making sure that no points and no dollars were left on the table, making sure that our data was clean, and making sure that there was no improprieties going on. I wanted to start there because of what happened in Kansas City when I arrived. When I looked at the data in Kansas City, part of the way that Missouri does accreditation is with something called MSIP, but attendance mattered in that formula in Kansas City. And what I found is that Kansas City Public Schools, the administration before us, was cheating on attendance. And so because the data wasn't clean, because we didn't know what our actual baseline was, we didn't actually know where to start or what interventions to put in. With the data management team, I also want to be clear, I don't think there's any cheating going on in Sarasota. I just want to make sure that the data that we're looking at is the accurate and actual data. Once we know that the data's there, we can start to really work on those interventions. So we can bring in or expand MTSS, we can expand pre-K options. So I know that we just did 6 new pre-K classrooms here. But the truth with pre-K is it's probably one of the most important things that we can do to impact reading. When it comes to kindergarten, our kids are either coming in ahead or behind. There is no middle ground. And so we have to look at those pre-K options, work with our early learning coalitions, parents as teachers, whatever those options are, so that we can get our kids ahead when it's time to come into kindergarten. The other thing that we can look at is where are our best instructional leaders when it comes to reading. Some districts like to do what I call paint by numbers, where they put those best instructional leaders where the numbers matter the most, not where the teaching and learning matters the most. So you might see the best reading teachers at 4th and 5th grade as opposed to kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And so that's another thing I would want to look at when I pop the hood and kick the tires in Sarasota and really see, okay, what have we been trying already? I think a lot of this is probably known. I'm not inventing new wheels here. It's things and techniques that have been used throughout the country, some successfully and some not. The other thing that I would want to make sure that we're looking at when it comes to graduation rates is a hook and a plan. So making sure that each one of our students has a hook, whether that's a sport that they play, whether that's something they do with the arts, whether that's a club that they belong to, an intramural, but something has to bring our students to school every day. When you look at our students now, delayed gratification, their future isn't what's driving them to wake up every morning and come into class every day. They need that hook. The other thing they need is that plan. They have to know what their future is and believe that they can achieve it. With a hook and a plan, every student can really start to see why school is important. I have 5 boys myself. I have 3 that constantly ask me, Dad, why do I have to go to school today? Those 3 are my ESE students, but for them, it's a struggle. And the reason a hook and a plan is so important, especially for our ESE kids, is when we start talking about motivation for learning and we start to talk about self-efficacy. When you look at our ESE kids, they come in and they fail repeatedly at what they're trying to do. We do the right thing, which is giving them grade level content, but they fail at grade level content repeatedly. And that starts to build malignant self-confidence and very low self-efficacy and very low motivation for learning. The hook and the plan can help them overcome that. And the reason why is the literature shows that with students who struggle with achievement, if they can achieve at anything at all, their resiliency factors go up. So their ability to keep at it goes up, even if what they achieve at is baseball or theater or music, it goes up. And while the literature shows that for our ESE kids, it applies to all of our kids. When they achieve somewhere in their academic experience, they achieve everywhere in their academic experience. So hook it a plan, make sure that we expand pre-K, look at where our best teachers are at, and then make sure that we have clean data and we know what we're working with.
Thank you. It's catchy, a hook and a plan. Karen. Mrs. Rose, pardon me.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips, what can we expect from you as our superintendent in terms of communication and decision-making? Please provide examples of your ability to effectively communicate to different audiences.
Thank you for the question. Sure. What you can expect from me as superintendent is communication that is authentic and transparent with all of our stakeholder groups. One of the challenges that I see for Sarasota, when I was looking and trying to really see and get a feel for the district, is I saw kind of a tale of two districts, if you will. I saw the marketing that was happening and how great Sarasota Schools is, and then I saw the data. And those two don't jive right now. Looking at the data, we're tied for 5th place in the state. I see scores either staying the same or sliding in almost every area, but the marketing that's going out to our community groups, to our stakeholders, to our parents says that we're still amazing. I can even see on niche.com where we're ranked number 2 in the state. And so it can be very confusing when you have to do the work that you have to do as a superintendent and as a board to move Sarasota Schools if the communication and marketing that's happening doesn't align with the data, because when you start doing the work to address the data, you're undoing the marketing work. And so transparency and that really clear communication about where we are and what it is that we have to do to move the needle for our kids has to happen in an authentic way. The other thing when it comes to communication is making sure that we're listening to all of our stakeholder groups, not just the ones that we like, not just the ones that we agree with, but all of our stakeholder groups to make sure that all of those perspectives are important. I believe very strongly in talking with everybody, whether I agree with them, disagree with them, whether they like me or not. There's valuable perspective and information in every single one of those opinions. And I like to bring all of that information into the decision-making process. And the other thing that I like to communicate, and is very important, is for people to understand my decision-making process, which is stay objective, use the relevant objective data, try to eliminate emotion from the decision, and make sure that the decision always starts with what is best for our students, what is best for the academic gains of our students, what's best for the welfare of our students, and what's going to move the district ahead. If you see a decision from me as your superintendent that doesn't align with that, then feel free to question my decision-making process and hold me accountable, because I should be sticking to that.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Describe a time you provided leadership around an issue that was considered controversial and had an internal or external opposition. How did you address the concerns, and what was the ultimate outcome?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I'll go back to my time at Kansas City Public Schools when I had to go into the superintendent's office and tell him that the plan that he had wasn't going to work. That's not a very popular situation, if you can imagine. And then we had to go tell everybody who worked really hard on the plan that there were some elements that we could save, but the plan's not going to work. The reason the plan wasn't going to work is there was no way to operationalize it. There was no way to turn the plan into a work breakdown structure, into tasks that people could do and understand that would roll up into the plan. So as an example, when you do a strategic plan, that should turn into your comprehensive school improvement plan, which should turn into SIPs and DIPs. Your SIPs are your school improvement plans, your DIPs are your department or division improvement plans. All of those should roll up into the overall strategic plan. If you're not able to come up with your SIPs and DIPs from your strategic plan, you don't have a plan that's workable. You have wish casting, or things that look great on paper that are not achievable or not even measurable. So when I went and told the superintendent, there's actually not much to achieve in the plan, and there's no way to achieve some of the other things that are in the plan. We had to rework it. And not just a strategic plan, the new plan that we came up with was very uncomfortable for a lot of folks inside and outside of the district. We had in Kansas City folks that had been in those jobs for 25, 35, 40 years doing work the same way, with the same systems or the same manual processes or the same ways of thinking. We had to go through and transform the entire district. We called it a digital transformation project, but we looked at every single opportunity for efficiency and effectiveness in every single department, every single division, and every single school. It was a lot of work. The framework that we used, we had to create ourselves because nothing we found was going to move the needle for our students. And we had stakeholders, internal and external, that were not at all comfortable with the decisions that we were making. We had to take money from some very popular programs and buy student laptops and get those deployed to our students. We had to invert classrooms into flipped classrooms because our students weren't able to do homework at home very well in Kansas City Public Schools. We had to get them their content at home, so those lessons, but we had to be able to get the work done at school because of the demographics of the district and the ability to feel safe and have those hierarchy of needs met at home. Putting that type of thing on that student or those students in that district was just not a possibility, and we had to be truthful with ourselves about that. So coming up with techniques like that went against the grain, went against the momentum of the district is something that we absolutely had to do. In year one, we didn't really see the type of, if you would have just stopped the project at year one, you would have thought everybody that was pushing back was correct. But by the time we got to year two and we realized the highest scores out of 30 years and we reached enough points to get accreditation with the state, you started to see that the plan was actually working. The way that I address, to get to the other part of the question, how do I work with those folks, is I have what I call my feedback pushback continuum. So feedback is very, very healthy. Feedback is conflict, potentially, but it's really people are understanding the vision, they're understanding where you're trying to go, and they're trying to give you feedback in order to actually get there. Pushback starts, however, when people are working against you actively from achieving the goals that you're trying to meet. And when pushback starts, you'll see back channeling of communications, people relying on pockets of protection that they might have formed throughout the school district, leveraging previous relationships, and really trying to stop the momentum of the work. And so what I do is I make sure that I look at each of those different situations that's happening, whether it's a committee chair, employees in the district, or whatever, and I really see where they're at on that pushback feedback continuum, and I have conversations with them, and I say, right now, I really feel like you're pushing back. Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. How can we get from where I feel like you're pushing back, because I really want to see your feedback. I really want to incorporate your concerns with what's going forward. And maybe I can explain something better to you. Maybe you're just not seeing or understanding, or maybe I'm off base and your feedback is very important. So it goes to that communication piece, but it really has to be structured within that framework.
Thank you. Are there any follow-ups? No? Okay. Mr. Enos.
As our superintendent, what evidence will our community, parents, and staff observe that will demonstrate that you're an effective leader for Sarasota County?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Enos. I think the first thing that they'll see right off the bat is my decision-making process and how I would come in and pop the hood and kick the tires. We talk a lot in education about some things that parents don't really see or understand as evidence of effective leadership. So as an example, I don't think any of my kids can tell you the grades that their schools have. I don't think they can tell you the reading scores. I don't think that they can tell you the math scores, social studies, or science scores. What parents see is, do I trust this educational institution to educate my child? Do I trust that if when I send my child to school, they're going to have an enriched educational experience, that maybe they can even come home and tell me what they did that day? And I can see that my child is safe in this environment to reach the educational excellence that I expect from the school district. So the very first thing that parents would see from me as superintendent is that is where my focus is, and that they can trust sending their child to us to be educated. We're in an environment now in the state of Florida where choice is everything. And what I would like to do with Sarasota County Schools is to make us that number one choice. That means we compete. Public schools have not had to compete for a very long time, so we've been able to do things that we wouldn't be able to do in a competitive environment. And when we compete, we can win. We have everything that we need in Sarasota County Schools to become the school option of choice for each and every one of our parents. So they would see that. The other thing that they would see very quickly with me is putting in structures and norms that we would operate under. So in my 90-day accounting plan that you that you have, and I think it's been posted online now, you'll see at the end of that is some administrative norms. Those norms need to be put in place rapidly. So first I would assess and see what norms are already put in place, but those norms are exactly how we would operate as administrators throughout the district. They're leadership norms. It's how we treat each other. It's what we believe. It's how we behave in public and private, and it is what we work on to achieve. By establishing those norms as well as expectation documents for each one of my direct reports, each one of my direct reports would be able to really start to understand what my expectations are, to include that they would have expectation documents with each of their direct reports all the way to principals and every leadership position in the district. Expectation documents are important because the first time that someone finds out that they're not meeting expectations should not be their evaluation. It should be at the beginning, and with those documents, I bring those out every time I have a one-on-one with my direct reports, and we go through each and every norm, and we go through each and every expectation to make sure that they're meeting it, or we're going to talk about why not and what they can do better. Through those expectation documents, you're able to have accountability, which is expectations plus consequences or repercussions. A lot of times we talk about accountability in education as just we're going to throw something in someone's evaluation. They're not going to have a good evaluation. That's how I'm going to hold them accountable. With me as a superintendent, I'm going to hold you accountable not just to your scores, but to your deliverables, what's in your expectation document, to the norms, and there will be consequences and repercussions as part of that accountability.
Thank you. Questions, follow-ups? Okay, thank you. Mrs. Marinelli. Oh, Mr. Edwards. Go ahead.
As a quick question, have you executed to that plan? I mean, have you exercised that in Kansas City schools or Broward? And how did that work?
For the which part of the plan?
The consequences and
Yes.
repercussions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, absolutely. So yes, which I'll tell you was it was new for some folks in Kansas City. But yes, we were able to do expectation documents and accountability measures throughout the district in Kansas City. It actually ended up having an extremely positive impact on Kansas City. So the very first thing that we realized is you can be a little bit hesitant when you're really laying out expectations for people, and it can be difficult for leaders, especially new leaders, to say, these are my expectations of you in your performance and in your behavior. But what ended up happening in Kansas City Public Schools is that people were thanking us for giving them clear expectations. They now knew exactly what they had to work for, and when we had the strategic plan turned into the CSIP with the SIPs and DIPs, they saw what the what was. That was the plan that they had for their department or their school. And then they saw the expectations and the norms of how we're going to operate. So within Kansas City Public Schools, it actually did some phenomenal work. I would say that they're going through a little bit of change now under a new superintendent in Kansas City Public Schools. But I still see the SIPs and DIPs and the CSIPs and the expectation documents are still surviving and still going strong there.
I don't know if I can survive more acronyms.
Absolutely.
Mrs. Marinelli.
I just have a follow-up question. Did Kansas City, did you have a union?
We did.
And I'm sure, how did negotiations go with that, your expectations document?
Yeah, so the expectations document actually went really well. If really well means that it wasn't part of teacher evaluations. It was part of administrator evaluations, which really is what expectation documents are for, is for that leadership level. We already had a really good evaluation instrument for our line employees, so our teachers and our non-instructional staff. But why it went really well is our line staff people loved it. They loved that now they, for the first time, saw that their leaders were actually being held accountable. The other thing that we put in place in Kansas City Public Schools was something that I call advocates, which is just another channel that folks can give comments or concerns directly to the superintendent in order to get out of that kind of normal chain of command. So advocates are people that regular folks can trust. They can go and tell them just the concerns of what's going on. Advocates keep you anonymous so that what filters to the top is just the challenge or concern or what's going on. And what we were able to do in Kansas City through data collection of that qualitative data that was coming in from advocates is we were able to come up with amazing opportunities for improvement. We were hearing directly from our folks, unfiltered, of what was really happening in our schools, what was really happening in our departments, and we were able to then use that to come up with plans for the strategic plan, for the SIPs and DIPs, sorry, Mr. Edward, and start to build that into our expectation documents. So one of the greatest examples is toxic leadership. When you have a principal that's really trying to move a school, there's good ways to do that, there's not so good ways to do that. You can come in and completely stress out all of your teachers, make them work harder than they've ever needed to work on things that don't actually move the needle, and you can do paint by numbers leadership as a principal, focusing on stacking up AP classes or acceleration points on your top 10%, neglecting your lowest quartile, so that it looks like you're moving the numbers, and that's not the best way to move things. But because of the normal chain of command, we wouldn't hear from the line of this is what's actually happening in the schools. We would get filtered information up from the principals, through the assistant superintendents, over through the teaching and learning stuff that would come to cabinet. And by the time those filters happened, I think we've all played the telephone game growing up, we're not getting the best and clearest data of what's actually happening on the ground. So through the advocates, we were able to get qualitative data and really see if it was matching that quantitative data and make adjustments as needed.
Just, I know you have an next quick follow-up. Who can you give me an example of who would be an advocate? Like what position?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do with advocates is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their position is. I prefer to have people that are not already in leadership positions and folks that folks trust. And that's the only criteria, is they're willing to speak truth to power and they can be trusted by the folks around them. And the other thing about advocates is you're not assigned an advocate. There's a list of advocates throughout the district. You can go to any advocate that you want. The whole entire point of advocates is it's about the problem we're trying to solve. It's not about the people. It's not about trying to find out who said this, who thinks that there's a problem with this or that. It's about the problem itself and what can we do. Sometimes it's personal stuff, and when we dig into it, there's not a lot there. Other times it is incredibly rich data, and we can start to see it coming in from across the district, and we can start to see emerging themes come out of that we need to take action on, and that's data that we would have never seen any other way.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Marinelli, sorry.
What importance do you place on standardized assessment results, and how do you leverage those results to evaluate programs and design staff development?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. It depends on what we're calling standardized testing, so I just want to make sure that I qualify my answer. So there's some standardized testing that is what I refer to as too little, too late. So as an example, in Missouri, there's something called the Mastery Achievement Proficiency MAP testing. Well, MAP testing happens in the spring, and we get the results of that almost in August, and we don't have time to take action for the next school year. So we're always a year behind on what action we can take. When we look at something like fast testing, where we can take benchmarks throughout the year and get actionable intelligence from that, where we can make a difference, then I love that type of standardized testing, because with that, we can do my favorite line, which is just always turns into adjust. We can have the best plan at the beginning of a school year, but when that data starts to come out, we can start to see, is our new plan working? How are our instructional practices? How are our proficiency rates? Do we have some movement to make here or there? Do we need to do some personnel changes? Do we need to retrain on something? Do we need to get some instructional coaches over to this school or that school? And that's what the data can do for us on that. There is something to be said about exam fatigue when it comes to our students. However, I also believe that if our instructional practices, if our curriculum, our pacing guides, and all of that is matching, which is hard to do with FAFSA being new, but if it's matching along with that standardized testing, then what we're really doing is at that point benchmarking instead of just prepping for the test and then making adjustments. Sure.
Thank you. Are there any follow-ups? Okay. Special education is a complex challenge for our district. What do you believe to be the best approach to ensuring that our students with needs are appropriately educated?
Thank you for that question. As a father of 3 ESE students myself, the most important thing for me is that we do not see or view our ESE students through a deficit lens. That is, if you don't start there, nothing else you do matters. So first and foremost is understanding that each and every one of our ESE students can achieve, and they can achieve wonderful, great things. The other thing when it comes to our ESE students is providing proper accommodations, making sure that our ESE teachers and support staff have what they need to do their jobs. So yes, we need to make sure that what they're doing is appropriate, but the other thing that happens with SLPs, reading coaches, they don't get what they need a lot of times to do the work that they're here to do. And we need to make sure that they have that. The other thing that I think is very important is making sure that parents understand the IEPs, the 504s, gifted plans, and that they actually understand so that they can advocate for their child. There's a lot of acronyms inside of these plans. There's a lot of acronyms when it comes to ESE in total, and we can get really far down the road with an ESE student before the parents understand what's actually happening. And I'll just give you a great example with my own son. We got all the way to 4th grade believing what the schools were telling us about, what they were telling us about literacy and why he couldn't read. They were doing blended literacy, and it just was not going to work. He was dyslexic. He had speech apraxia. He also has autism and ADHD. And the blended literacy was never going to work for him. We were getting alphabet soup, although my wife became a teacher later. I was not an educator. She was not an educator at the time, and we couldn't make heads or tails of what was going on. So we took it all the way up as high as you could go in a school district, getting the same alphabet soup the whole time and being told, trust the process, trust the process. Well, we finally learned how to educate ourselves. We got the right advocate, and my wife ended up quitting her job, learning Orton Gillingham, pulling my son out of school for a year, and teaching him how to read. When we brought him back to school, and I said he has to continue with Orton Gillingham, the school told me that dyslexia is not recognized. It's under specialized learning disability, and they don't offer that accommodation. So I had been educated enough by that point in time, and I know my son better than anybody else except my wife, and he needed that, and so we fought for that. But when we were trying to trudge through all the alphabet soup that got thrown our way, we were not able to advocate for our son in the way that he needed. We were able to apply that to our other ESE students as well, but that's one of the most important things. And also with ESE, one of the things that I would do almost immediately is a full ESE evaluation plan. So I would love to bring in outside agency, pop the hood, kick the tires, and really look at what is happening in ESE throughout the district. Again, we're getting filtered information at the top of a school district, and whether it's a lack of resources, a lack of training, or any of that, it's hard to do that when you're inside the system and understand what's actually happening inside the system. So outside expertise that works with our school districts all over the nation that can come in and really do a full assessment and tell us what needs to happen, I think is the best things to do.
Thank you. Well, it's good to know that we do have a third-party consultant that we did recently just get particularly to focus in on the ESE piece. But I thank you for sharing that. I think one of the questions I have, and I know that you're Broward, which is an incredibly large, huge school district. I think the sixth largest in the country.
Yes.
But understanding to make those changes, and even with a third-party clear lens, what kind of, you went through the process on one side, but you're also on the other side understanding. So what would that turnaround look like? Yeah, so turnaround, it depends. It's the best way to answer that. What I would like the turnaround to look like is pedal to the metal, absolute rapid deployment of the PTAC process for turnaround.
if we have a strategic plan that has been broken down the way that it needs to be, then we can work with our different organizational units in order to make sure that what needs to happen can happen, and it can happen fast. It's tough now, being in mid-June, to try to make an impact for first semester. But what I would expect is that an evaluation can happen within the first 60 days of first semester, can come up with an action plan and start to implement during next semester or second semester of next school year. When we look at the actual plan itself on what needs to happen, the data will drive a lot of that, but I would likely come back to the board, say this is what the data has shown us we absolutely need to do. Whether, I'll just take one example, it's Orton-Gillingham, but it could be that we're having trouble with IEPs being generated and stored, and how teachers can see accommodations and all that, because systems don't talk to each other and teachers might not know how to get in or apply IEPs and that kind of thing. But what's important is we grab all of that information, all that data, we create the action plan with actual steps, and then I would come back and I would ask the board for money. That's just the way it would be. I would come back and ask for the plan. I think that there are ESSER dollars available to implement, and I think the challenge isn't necessarily the money to put towards the problem. I think it's the capacity and the implementation part of the plan that needs to be worked out. And so for me, I would come up with a very rapid plan to get us through the implementation part. Transition would start to happen likely the following school year, because we'd have to get to that shift of that onus over to the actual instructional leaders and instructors that are making that happen, and then getting over to the adoption phase. I think we could do the school year after next, but I would want to get started, get all of our teachers trained that need to be trained on that, or whatever those changes are, as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Mrs. Rose.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips, we are very interested in improving upon our status as a very good school district. We also know that it will take hard work and commitment to address our areas of weakness. What are some ideas you have that could be worth exploring as we strive to create better futures for our students?
Thank you, Ms. Rose. The first thing that I would really want to make sure that we focus on is the hook in the plan for all of our students. And that's not just our high school students, that's all of our students. If education is a way to move our students ahead, then we have to have them here. We have to have them in the seats getting instruction, and then we have to benchmark and stock take on that instruction to make sure that it is happening appropriately. The reality is that in order to move our district ahead, we have to know who we're competing against. So you'll see in the 90 days and counting plan that I gave you, I broke down each of the 11 different areas. So we know that we're up against St. John's as the kind of number one right now, but I looked at each of those different areas and who is best in each area right now and where we need to move the needle in each area in order to be the best in each area. It's an aggressive plan, but I think that in order to really say that we are the absolute best, not just in the state of Florida, but in the country, that we have to move the needle in each and every area, not do paint by numbers, not say we can move this and neglect this, and if we do that, then we'll go from being a tie for 5th place to number 3 within 18 months, but really truly be the best, and then let the numbers reflect that instead of going after the numbers. When you go after the numbers, you can end up saying that's good enough. You can say 98% of this is good enough. Well, each time you reach a good enough, you're leaving out students. And I strongly believe that we are here to build successful futures for each student every day. It's not about all students, it's about each student. All means we can get close to all, and then we can call it a day. Each means 100% or we're not done working.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. As superintendent, what would your first 60 to 90 days look like on the job?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Edwards. So the public and board can see my plan, but primarily I'll break it down like this. The first set is listen and learns. I do that with all stakeholders to include students, community groups, teachers, and administrators, but I also make sure that I get with the operational side of the house. A lot of times, the efficiency and the effectiveness that we can make happen on the operational side, as well as the empowerment, gives us more resources that we can put back in the classroom. And so I would want to do those listen and learns. I call them donuts with Dr. Joe. And I just go and I listen and I hear what are the problems, what are we freaking out about, what's not working, what do you need, and really start to get that data collected. I also make sure that I'm starting to build those relationships. I talked about the 2 types of trust earlier. Those first impressions really matter, and they're hard to overcome. So the first 60 days has to be about meeting and making those first impressions and really starting to get people to understand and believe that I can be that trusted leader that can lead our district. When we talk about the rest of the work that needs to happen, a SWOT analysis absolutely would occur within my first 30 to 60 days, looking really at those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the district, but also to our future plans of becoming the best district in Florida. Part of that analysis, yes, it'll look at teaching and learning. It's also going to look at the operational side of the house. It's going to look at HR. It's going to look at safety and security operations. I think finance is super wonderful here. Looking at the budget book, it was in really great shape, and I like that it started with the awards at the beginning there. We got some work to do on budget with what's coming up, but I feel like we're in really good shape there. But really looking at each and every part of the district. The other thing I have is what I call my 4 lenses approach. And with the 4 lenses, I look at structure, I look at systems, I look at culture, and I look at internal politics. So when we look at...
Can you repeat those 4?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, so the 4 lenses are structure, and structure is how are we built. So that's going to involve the organizational chart, it's going to involve where lines of authority are, and how authority and work is actually performed throughout the district. The next is systems. Systems is looking at everything from what do we do and to how do we do it. So that can be our IT systems, but it can also be our work breakdown structures. It can also be looking kind of at the org chart, but seeing basically if we have work to do, can we take the work in, can it go through the system effectively and efficiently and come out with the product that we believe it should on the other side. And then is there efficiency or effectiveness that we can add to that system? So really, when we look at efficiency and effectiveness, the analogy that I like to use is a swimming pool. And if we put a kickboard at the end of the swimming pool and we said, go get it, you can be the fastest swimmer in that pool. And we can make you even faster, and we can make you even faster, and we can look at your strokes, and we can look at your kicks, and we can make you faster and faster and faster, and you can get to that, you can get there faster and faster and faster. That's efficiency. Effectiveness says, why are we swimming to get there? I can get there twice as fast if I just walk on the side of the pool down there. And so that is what we need to look at when we look at our systems is we might be doing stuff the best way that it can possibly be done, but is that the way it needs to be done? Or is there another way to do it that would be more effective? So that's the systems approach. Next is culture. The cultural lens is what do we believe and how do we treat each other when we work together? So the belief part can get a little bit dicey, but basically I think that we can all find common ground on we believe in coming here and moving the needle for each and every one of our students each and every single day. That is what we would believe as the foundation of the culture, as well as a belief in excellence that each student has the ability to reach their maximum potential. That is the culture of what we should believe in a school system. The how do we treat each other part of culture means, are we authentic? Do we disagree at the table, but then we all get behind the decision and we work together to make it happen? Or do we agree at the table and then we start going and working against it and we start to build our pushback scheme because we don't agree with the decision that was made at the table? That is the how do we treat each other. Also, do we talk poorly about each other or do we trust each other, that type of stuff. The political lens also looks at the decision making, but it looks at who is making decisions. So is it the people with the actual authority that was given to them in the org chart, or have people collected different pockets of power throughout the district or different influences, or they can call so-and-so to leverage a decision or that kind of thing? That's the political piece, is are decisions made at the right level by the right people? So I would look at those 4 lenses in combination with the SWOT analysis so I could really get an understanding of the inner workings of the district.
Thank you. Any follow-ups? Mr. Enos.
Well, what has been your approach to budget development, and how can we assure the district priorities are being met?
Yeah. So with budget development, I'm from the military. I'm a huge proponent of zero-based budgeting. Otherwise, we're just creating shopping lists, and I don't believe in shopping lists. We have to make sure that we have the money that we need to spend, but that's secondary. First and foremost is, do we have a unified plan and vision that we're working towards? When you have the strategic plan that's been broken into that comprehensive school improvement plan, that's been broken into the SIPs and DIPs, budgeting becomes very easy because we don't have conflicting agendas at that point in time. We're not Peter Pauling, as I call it, where we're taking money from here and now they can't achieve their initiative because this initiative is more important this year. It is what are our actual initiatives. With the SIPs and DIPs, we agree. Those all roll up. They all get evaluated by the senior leadership team. And we say, yes, your school improvement plan makes perfect sense. This is exactly what needs to happen for your school. And we're going because that's now a priority, that gets budget. When it comes to a department, maybe we want to be the kind of district that has a robust one-to-one program where students take home. We flip classrooms where the content's being delivered at home. And if that's a priority, then that gets budget. If it's not a priority, then other things get priority. But the time to fight over those priorities is not budget season. It's long before. It's when we're doing the actual planning season. The other thing I do with budget is I don't wait for budget season to do budget. I find that puts us in a position of a lot of pressure. It also puts the board in a position of a lot of pressure. You don't have time to workshop it. You don't have time to really get the board's feedback or priorities that they believe we should have inside of the budget. And a lot of times when I see budget come to the board, their backs are against the wall. And they kind of have to approve the budget. And they don't get to dig in as deep as a board really should. Some folks see that as micromanagement, but the board has that fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely and appropriately. And then finally with budget is making sure that we're transparent and the board understands exactly what it is that we're trying to do with the budget and understands how it actually truly aligns to the strategic plan. The thing that I will say is one of my pet peeves, just being a chief at a school district, is when we take board items to the board, and the strategic plan is a dartboard, and we just say, okay, which initiative do we say that this falls under when we ask for the money for it? And the reason that happens isn't because people are trying to put one over on the board. It's because they don't understand how their work aligns with the strategic plan. And so when you do that pre-work, folks know exactly what they're going to buy next year. We'll have to shift. We always will. Just always turns into adjust. But we have that plan, and the budget aligns and mirrors that plan.
Thank you. I'm just going to note it is 3:03, so you have 2 more questions, and then it's open to you to ask if there's anything else you want to share with us, and or ask us any questions and then close. So as long as we are done by 3:15, is that right? 3:30. Oh no. So I'm never mind. Disregard. Keep going. We're good on time. I wrote down 3 o'clock. Mrs. Marinelli.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips, academics, athletics, and the arts often compete for a school's resources. What is the relative importance of each, and how might a district find the proper balance between them and the many other funding priorities?
Thank you for that question. I love that question. So for me and my perspective, the first thing to understand from where my perspective is those are not mutually exclusive things. Just for transparency, I wouldn't have graduated high school without the arts and without sports. So a little bit about my background is I needed more money to be poor when I was growing up. We were that low down. Both of my parents struggled with addiction. My father lost his struggle to addiction in 2012. It was tough, but the arts for me and sports for me were my hook. For me, I played soccer. I also did wrestling. Sorry, Mr. Enos, I know it's not baseball or any of those sports, but I also did the arts. I did theater. I did singing. I played the bass. I played piano. Played percussion, and also, please don't ask me to do any today, but musical theater. So I sang, and I also did tap, jazz, and ballet. The wonderful thing about those being my hook is they were able to push me through those other things that were happening in my life. They were my reason for showing up to school every day. And although I was gifted and went to magnet schools for gifted in early education, by the time I got to high school, none of that mattered. And it was literally waking up every day, trying to go through this experience that I didn't care very much about. And what was getting me there and getting my butt in the chair was the arts and the sports. The other amazing thing about the arts is the literature that shows that it helps tremendously with the academics. What the arts is able to do by building that bridge across the corpus callosum from the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere to our students is amazing. And it has such strong academic impact. And I find it amazing that here at Sarasota County Schools, there's even a circus program. I just find that absolutely amazing. But the hooks for our kids here in Sarasota are amazing. We have great hooks, great reasons for our kids to show up today to school and to get educated today at school. When it comes to prioritizing these things, again, budget's tough, especially with what we got coming with the vouchers and the ESSER funding drying up. Budgeting's tough, and I think that the first place to start with arts and with sports and with academics is to not pretend that they're mutually exclusive of each other. And we have different educational opportunities at different schools for different types of students who like to go to those different schools. But understanding that there has to be a balanced approach and there has to be that importance that is placed on these two things when budgeting, and that is an expectation of each of our administrators and through our finance folks as well, that the expectation is these are not lop-off programs. These aren't programs that we just say they're nice to haves. These are essential programs. And understanding a way forward and finding a way to say yes to making sure that our sports and our clubs, our intramurals, and our arts activities are still there and available as hooks for students. And for some, they're more than a hook. That's a future career. And we want to make sure that we have that pathway open for them as well.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Of course, absolutely. We got more time than I thought. So we're good.
You're talking about the budget and how, there's specific things. How do you feel about, what would you do to look for extra support or monies?
Thank you for that question. There's a couple things that we can do. One, I talked about those operational efficiencies. So just as an example, I got to Broward County Public Schools a year ago, and I've already cut $1 million out of my annual budget that can go back to academics because I was able to find $1 million every year just in my budget just by changing a couple of things. Was also able to work with safety and security to achieve better goals with less money, and by shifting, safety and security had an IT shop under them. We shifted that over. That freed up all of that staffing money that got to go back to academics or to some of those security projects. I will turn over every rock, looking for grants, looking for community partners, looking for different opportunities for funding to come in. But I also do it under the whole approach. So if we can get those community partners, grants, or whatever to come in for safety and security, well, that's some money we might be able to use over here. If we can get it on academics, well, maybe here's some money we can do over here. I don't just go out and look for money for theater or go and look for money for football or those other things. Yes, there's booster clubs, and yes, there's all of this, but my approach is we are an entire ecosystem of educational leaders, and I look from a totality approach of what is the ecosystem, and I will look under every rock. I'm very good at finding money. I will look under every rock possible to get us as much funding possible to be the best district that we can be.
Someone's going to hold you to that. Yeah, I'm very good at finding money. My question is, and I'm going to actually add it more of a specific, but we have often heard that the education in our state, in our county, and I'm adding country, has become too political. How will you, as our superintendent, work to ensure that you are leading in an apolitical manner? In Florida, certainly there have been legislative items that have come back over the last couple of years that people have difference of opinions on, and particularly inside and outside the school district. Can you use those as an example of how you would handle this?
Sure, I can do that. I think first and foremost is two things. One, you have to trust me as a superintendent. I have to be worthy of that trust, and that means I have to show you that I'm worthy of that trust. I have to show you my decision-making process. if you know how I make my decisions and you can see that that's how I make my decisions, then you can see that politics don't really enter into my decision making. And that's the thing. If anybody can hold me accountable to my decision-making process, I encourage it. And if somebody says, "Hey, Dr. Phillips, I don't think you followed your process on this one," then my response is always, "Let's talk about it. Let me hear." Right. So either I didn't show well enough to that individual or to that group that I was actually following my process, and I was not allowing those political pressures to come in. So I either didn't show it, or there was just something I completely missed, and I'm willing to say, "Yep, missed that one. Sorry." Thank you so much for bringing this to my attention, and I will adjust. The other thing that we talk about with politics and a superintendent is I have to make sure that everybody knows that I do not make deals, and I'm too big to fit in anybody's pocket. I am my own person. I make decisions based off the data that I am able to collect. I don't do this behind the scenes backdoor meeting. I just don't do it. I don't believe in it. I've never seen it go well. I've seen superintendents that make those kind of deals. I've seen superintendents make deals that cross over other deals that they've made, and they can't make either deal come true. And you get caught up when that's the way that you try to become and stay a superintendent, is with making those types of deals. You'll see with me, I've made no deals. I haven't even talked to folks here in Sarasota. I'm about to talk to a room full of them, but I think that I've seen throughout my career too many times that leaders come in that way. They already have their agenda. They already have what it is that they want to do. I just don't believe in that, and I will show that if I'm the selected candidate. When we talk about some things specifically that have come out of in statute, some of these things are tough. They're tough to understand. There's division, of course, on some of these things that have come out. So when we talk about legislation that just came out about not compelling speech, as an example, that's a tough one. There's perspective on both sides of that, and when you look at what's best for the education of students, the real question I have is, where does that fit in the education of our students, and why is it a topic of discussion? If I can't align it to what we're trying to do here for the betterment of the educational outcomes for our students, then it becomes a different type of conversation for me. It becomes a conversation of, where does it fit in the plan? Where does it fit in the work that we're trying to do? Is it noise? Is it pressure? And everybody has opinions, and they'll come here and share those opinions, and they'll try to pressure and apply pressure in different ways. But that type of pressure isn't going to influence my decision-making process. And I think that the more that I can show that, the more that people understand that, the more that they believe that I really do align with what we're trying to accomplish for our students here.
Thank you very much. Just writing down my notes. Well, that concludes our questions, unless there are any follow-ups from board members. But wanting to ask you if there are any items that you wanted to share with the board that haven't been addressed. If you have any questions for us, and any closing remarks.
Thank you. I don't have any questions for the panel. I think if any come up, then I'll bring those up in the one-on-ones tomorrow. One thing that I do want to say is I never expected, it was not on my bucket list, to be a superintendent. Leadership is what I love, and I really truly believe that I'm the leader that Sarasota County Schools needs right now, with where it is and where it's needing to go. It's amazing to me, the passion that I see in Sarasota County Schools, how everybody wants what's actually best for students. We might just disagree on how that, or what the best way possible is in order to get there. I am very, very excited about this opportunity, and I have not even applied for any other districts to be a superintendent for any other districts. For me, it's Sarasota County Schools, or I'll take my ball and go somewhere else. It's not about being a superintendent for me. It's being the leader that Sarasota County Schools needs. The other thing I want to just touch on briefly is, I know that my background is non-traditional for a superintendent. Again, I think that's what Sarasota County Schools needs right now. There are a lot of instructional leaders that I have had as my students, as an adjunct professor, doctoral mentor, or dissertation chair, that have really struggled from making that jump from instructional leader to educational leader. We're an ecosystem, and if all you can see is the instructional side of the house, you miss being able to leverage the entire ecosystem for what's best for students. And so for me, I just want to really clearly say that you can look at kind of my past, and it is non-traditional, but I truly am an educational leader. I believe in the education of our students. I know how to apply the right levers to make the instructional things happen, but I also know how to look at us as an entire educational ecosystem and move the needle for all of our students and achievement. So with that, I'll just say thank you.
Well, thank you so very much for your time and for your candid responses. And we are a little bit ahead of time. Actually, we're 1 minute past, so never mind, we caught up. We will reconvene at 3:45 and with the next finalist, and I believe you will be heading over to the advisory panel. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
We are in recess until 3:45. Nope. Is it 3:45, Kathy? Man, we're really ahead of schedule. 1 minute.
We're hot.
Okay.
So when you're ready. So it's on right now.
Okay, welcome back. We are to our final finalists today in our interviewing for the superintendent. It is Monday, June 12th, and the time is 3:47. We'll make sure you get those extra 2 minutes, although yet we haven't had to do that. But I want to welcome Mr. Charlie Van Zant, and as just a quick housekeeping, we will be going through questions round robin. They're the same questions that we've asked each prior finalist, and we will start with Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome. I'll start out with what specific attributes or skills do you bring to Sarasota County that makes you the most qualified for this position?
That's really an easy one for me, and I appreciate the question. When I became the superintendent of schools in Clay County in 2012, I realized that I didn't have everything that I need. And before my first Middle East deployment, I had started an ed leadership program, a master's degree at University of Florida, and got pulled out to go deal with Mr. Hussein for a little while. But I shifted and I studied organizational leadership, and my specific degree later has morphed into servant leadership. And if you look at the attributes of a servant leader, there's several authors of it, Greenleaf, Maxwell, which I quoted in my action plan, Spears. They're all around trust, vision, humility, and service. And it calls for a servant leader to model integrity, character, excellence, and to be able to motivate people. So that's coming at you from one direction. And then the Army values have been instilled in me since I was a child. It just happened that the Army aligned with Charles Van Zant Sr.'s what we had to do at home, which was loyalty, duty, respect, honor, integrity, selfless service, personal courage. Almost exactly the same kind of character traits or attributes of a servant leader. And then when I got in the Army and went to Fort Benning, Georgia, I learned that leaders are supposed to eat last. If you're the captain and all your guys are starving and they fly out the meal to you and it don't look nearly enough to literally feed the Army that's yours, the senior NCOs and the officers serve it, and then you get any leftovers if there are any. And if you're at Camp Blanding, not Ali Salim, Kuwait, or Bagram, or any of the other numerous places I never want to go back to, you order Papa John's or Domino's, but you feed everybody. And that comes out of your wallet because no quartermaster ever gave you the budget to do it. So that's how I kind of approach everything. I taught my administrators in Clay County. We did a lot of breakfast meetings, and I always had the senior district staff serve the food, help me cook the food, and the newest assistant principals, if it was an administrative gathering, ate first, and the coordinators, and then they worked up to the principals and the deputy superintendent. So I model that, I believe that, and I hope that that's the kind of person you're looking for as a superintendent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any follow-ups? Okay, Mr. Edwards.
Good afternoon, Mr. Van Zant.
Good afternoon, sir.
Trust is an important ingredient in leadership. How would you build trust with internal and external stakeholders and the groups they might represent? Please provide a few examples.
Okay. So trust leads right back into communication. You have to communicate early and often. You have to do it by whatever your audience is willing to communicate to you with. So I'll give you my first example. 2012, I become superintendent of Clay County Schools. Parkland shooting happens. I walk into my office. I've been a superintendent for like 2 or 3 weeks at the time. And I told my IT guy we used to call him the phone guy, wire dogs, all those things in the military. I said, I need every principal online at 9 o'clock this morning. This was about 7:15 in the morning. He said, what do you mean? I said, I want everybody dialed into the phone on my desk. I need to talk to him. He's like, well, the former superintendent used to just invite them all down to Green Cove. I said, I don't want them off their campuses. They have more work to do on their campuses, immediate, urgent work right now. So we got pretty much everybody on the phone, and I think a few people were on the speaker on my cell phone. But they knew that if students weren't safe, then nobody was safe, and they learned that I was going to talk to them with the good and the bad and the unpleasant together, and we began to shore up that relationship. As I moved into my master's degree in organizational leadership, I learned how to do leadership surveys. And I don't mean just simply hitting SurveyMonkey. That'll get you there with some things. But actually with conversations with people that were in all different positions, instructional staff, administrators, support staff, talking to them about how they like to be communicated with and letting them know that you're open for feedback. If you give people opportunity to talk to you, they will talk to you. And if you respond to what they're telling you, they pay attention. Now, externally, the people out in the community, I surf the rubber chicken circuit. If it was Kiwanis, Rotary, breakfast, sunrise, church potluck meal, this person's having the gathering in the clubhouse at the golf course, if they invited me, I showed up. My standard operating procedure with my secretary, because I never knew where a day might take me. I would schedule a day, but buses bump into things, kids have seizures, things interrupt what you thought you were doing that day. And I would try to end up in the north end of Clay County. I live in the far southwest end of the county, and every day she'd put 3 or 4 things on my calendar. So depending on where I was, I stopped at something, if not 2 things on my way home every day. And so whether it was a school-based event, a civic-based event, businesses, leadership, faith-based, if they invited me, I came, and if I found out about them and had never talked to you, then I would kind of politely invite myself. But all of that builds trust when you respond to those people's needs. Most importantly, when they know that you're not going to rip the earth out from underneath them and that you're communicating down to every teacher in every classroom and every bus driver, and responding to their concerns and resourcing them appropriately, built a lot of trust. And not everybody always likes my decision. I would say my most ardent opponent ever in my life would not tell you they didn't trust me.
Thank you. Mr. Enos.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. How have you led significant change in your previous positions? What elements need to be included in change initiatives to offer reasonable opportunities for success? How will these changes be evaluated? Please provide an example in your experience.
Holy smokes, sir. That was about...
The multi-question question.
Okay, so the first one was leading big change.
Yes, it was significant change in your previous positions. What are the elements that you needed to use? Mm-hmm. How were they evaluated? And an example. So what's the change, how you implemented the change, and then an example of it.
Okay. So when I took over as superintendent of schools in Clay County, Florida, most of the administrators had been hired for their ability to manage expectations around facilities, what I call beans, balls, and buses. If every child got fed, if every child got to school mostly on time, if everybody had a locker and a lock issued, had a book, had a desk in the classroom, then the principals and assistant principals were doing their job. If the yard was manicured when the parents dropped them off in the morning or came for an event, that was enough. Well, by 2012, we were morphing out of FCAT to FCAT 2.0. We had Common Core, later changed to Florida Standards. We had all these things bearing down on us from the state with significant accountability measures, and I had some great instructional leaders. I had some great facility leaders. I had very few in 42 schools that could do both well. And so I set that as the expectation. And we did that by going through, if you Google Superintendent's 100-Day Plan, every one of them in the World Wide Web is going to tell you have to listen and learn. And I don't diminish that, you do. So back to Mr. Edwards' question, how you build trust is also how you communicate. You go everywhere you can, you listen to as many people as you can. I did that. The first thing literally the first week or two in early December of 2012, I invited panels into the Clay County, actually it was Fleming Island High School where we held our board meetings. They had the nicest, newest, shiniest meeting room. And whether it was parents, business leaders, faith leaders, bus drivers, support staff, somebody's grandmother that was raising 5 kids, everybody that I could think of and that my staff could think of got invited. And we asked them what was working well, what wasn't working well, what were their ideas to improve it, and we quickly coalesced that feedback, like I guess you're going to get from this advisory committee I just met with. And then we rebuilt an academic plan that would put us on a plane. Then I had some very meager resources, and somebody will ask me about public school finance, I'm sure, at some point. But I invested in the necessary professional development in every area that was needed, that was crucial and prioritized. The Army taught me priorities of work really early in my career, and I can't get away from that. Everything does not have equal import, okay? So that change, I had to go back in. I said third grade reading scores. You guys have articulated primary grades reading. I said the kids whose parents are blue-collar laborers and live in the worst neighborhoods, those children have to be able to learn too. Now it's been refined to low socioeconomic, ESE, ELL. So we're all speaking a common language, and stop me if I use a term, but I think we're all probably on the same page here. So I told everybody that was leading a school building, I said, if you want to lead a school, you must be an instructional leader. Okay? It's not enough just to make sure the bathrooms are clean, the yard's trimmed, and every kid has a locker and a desk. That won't cut it anymore. I realize that that's what you were asked to do, but there's new expectations, there's new accountability measures. So if you don't want to lead differently, let me know. And a couple of them decided they want to do something different. And the rest of them tried to the best of their expectation, to the best of my knowledge, to turn into what we had to turn into. But I started with me, leading by example and getting the skills that I needed to make sure the whole railroad ran on time, to include academics. So that built a lot of trust quickly. In our administrative ranks, it takes longer because those people get to talk to the superintendent more, right? So classroom walkthroughs, not in an aggressive, I'm going to rip the reading carpet out from under the kindergartner teacher down there in the rocking chair with the storybook. I'm not, that's not me either. So please don't misunderstand me. But we had to change. We needed to pivot to not decrease academically and to stop an achievement gap that we had. And by the way, I had a lot of kids that were never going to college. Their parents hadn't prepared to. The kids had no interest in even being in high school, much less college. So we had to revamp our CTE and vocational offerings, and we did that. So that is an example of how I led change. How did that end up? At the end of my 4 years as superintendent, only 81 children, and I can't tell you how many third graders I had that year, entered summer reading camps. Like they would have otherwise been retained in third grade. But if you just do some math, 37,000 students divided by 13 grades, that's about 2,500 students that would third graders. 81 of them entered boot camp, and please don't quiz me on how many of them were promoted. I don't remember. That was 2016. But that improved dramatically. We went into the top 10 in Florida in third grade reading. Our graduation rate climbed. Went above the state and the federal average under my stewardship and leadership in Clay County for the first time in Clay County history, and they have continued to track upwards. So we broke 84% the year I left. I think they're right around 92, and it's once you're there, it's harder to get a whole lot better, right? And the other thing I told them that I would have to do is balance the budget, and I'll give you something before I leave. And for lots of reasons, in prior years, recovering from the recession, we didn't recover from the recession. That's really what led me to run for office. I couldn't even approve the budget in this year, and I was in Afghanistan this year, and that's tough. But people learned that we would steward the resources we had, we would prioritize our work, and that built a lot of trust relatively quickly.
Thank you. Any follow-ups? Then Mrs. Marinelli. You are recognized.
Thank you. How would you provide leadership to foster a strong board/superintendent relationship? How would you assist the board in reaching consensus on decisions? How would you deal with a serious difference of opinion between you as superintendent and the board?
Wow. Great multi-tiered questions. Thank you. I've tried to organize myself. My wife laughs at me. She says, you always write down these notes and you never look down. So literally, I'm trying to look down, but it's just not in my nature. So I would communicate with you, each of you, as early, as often, as individually, and as face-to-face as you will allow me to. If you got a coffee shop around the corner from your house you like to talk to, or if you like to come down here and talk, if you want to text by noon every day just to say nothing crazy has happened, if you want a weekly roll-up via email, you collaboratively, once you leave these chambers, have left the superintendent direction each and every time you meet. So I will be responsive to that. But I believe clear, concise, courteous communication is the rule. Initially, I will ask for a lot of face-to-face meetings because you miss a lot. I appreciated the Zooms we had last week. I'm learning even more just being able to look at your eyes and your body language towards me. I may or may not have had training interrogating people through the years, but never in a school, okay? But what you don't say to me as you're looking at me tells me a whole lot about you. So to hit this a little more squarely on the head, I will bring to you ideas that make sense based on the data that I can discern, based on the feedback that I have, and all I can say is past behavior is a good predictor of future success. Every curriculum and instruction plan I presented in Clay County, every budget I presented, every student code of conduct I presented was overwhelmingly 5-0 votes. Nobody ever said, look, I'm on the school board and I can do this better. Now, you two ladies probably can in some areas because of the length of time you worked here, and I will be very open and asking for your clarity around student services, academics. Law enforcement is a big piece. I've lived through some situations I never hope to go through again. Mr. Edwards and I talked about him being a recruiter, which means he knows how to read people. I'm going to need a lot of help in that area. And Ms. Ziegler, I'm still respectfully figuring you out. But
I'll
yeah,
let you know when I figure myself out.
I think you're an open book. Here I am at almost 53 years old trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. Once again, literally, I'm tracking towards flying for the airlines. I would love to be your superintendent. But honestly, I thought that this time in my life to lead a public education institution had been a closed chapter. I'm excited about the possibility that it might open back up. No matter how hard we have to discuss each issue, I will try to say all the things to you in our private meetings that are harder to hear and say. You will never, ever be surprised by me. You've already figured out, I've been in here 10 minutes, who I am. All of you aren't smart enough to figure that out. We've talked on the phone, we've talked via Zoom, and now you've met me in person. I am a very open book. You can call back to Clay County, whether they liked me or loved me or didn't love me at all. They will all tell you that I am a straight shooter. I don't sneak up on people. I worked with guys and supported guys that did that, but you will always get from me hopefully an eloquent, diplomatic solution to whatever problem we may be facing.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up, just because I know in Clay, if I'm correct, I believe I'm correct here. Clay County, you were elected, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So the governance structures, I think we briefly talked about this, is a little bit different with a board
Absolutely
that's
different.
Elected and then an appointed superintendent. So talk to me, because I am actually I find that elected superintendents with an elected board is curious to me from a governance structure. So alternatively, talk to me about what that difference would be with us here, if there would be any difference at all.
Well, I need to hear from the public, but in Clay County, I answered to the Republic, over 200,000 residents. How many of them showed up to vote? They were all giving into input, they were all basically my bosses. I was responsive to every family to the degree that I could. Or just some business off the street that had no direct involvement in the schools, but like, don't raise my taxes, or I'd be glad if we had a half-cent sales tax to catch the 50% of the people that eat on Wells Road in Clay County but live in Jacksonville and come down here and go to our mall and go to the Chili's, and, you know, we should be getting resources off of them. I mean, you hear it all over the place. But I was elected there in Clay County with a mandate to raise reading scores, close achievement gaps, get kids graduating from high school, and offer the kids that weren't graduating high school a path to get a job. And Rick Scott was the governor, so everything I did and said when I was flatlined financially when I took over, I did and said around 700,000 jobs in 7 years, and that's what I took to Tallahassee, and that's how I got us money beyond the normal FEFP to do what we had to do. But here, just to Ms. Marinelli's question, once we decide in these chambers what to do, if you tell me to rewrite a strategic plan or you tell me the one you have needs to be tweaked and here are the items we don't like, whatever the majority of this board directs in a board meeting, I'm going back to my office and either rewriting a strategic plan or bringing you some more thoughts on the code of conduct, or, hey, this non-reoccurring funds, I watched your budget workshop, these ESSER funds are going away. Make sure that we have any non-reoccurring money out of reoccurring lines of either debt service or reoccurring accounts. It's my job to be responsive to the five of you as a collective body for the direction you give when you're lawfully assembled under the Sunshine Law. That's the big difference.
Okay, no, that helps. It's always been curious to me, so I thought I'd seize the opportunity to ask.
Thank you.
Unless there are any other follow-ups, I'm going to go to the next question, which is mine. And similar to most districts in Florida and the country, we've seen significant learning gaps. How will you, as superintendent, develop strategies to improve upon the educational successes of our students? Please cite an example of a strategy initiative you have either implemented or would like to develop to address this challenge in Sarasota.
Okay. Again, everything I say today around academics or achievement gaps is based on what I can see publicly accessible through your website. You have bright people in here, I have no doubt. Sarasota County has always been an A. But what got you to be an A will not keep you an A. Okay? The last time the the State Board of Education for Florida met, they called out some of the programs that you have in your current reading plan as non-effective in various tiers of reading instruction. So, and believe me, you're not alone. When I took over in Clay County, we said things that made sense, but were harder to operationalize. They said children have to read, write, and talk about everything that they're doing. That's true. However, just simply putting a kid in front of a software program, and I'll try real hard to not name out software programs, that will not get it there for a lot of kids. Some kids are auditory learners, some are visual learners, and as I was leading to instructional excellence in Clay County, and I take a lot of that professional development on myself because some of it's so blatantly obvious and common sense. And I'm not a reading coach, don't profess to be, don't play one on TV, okay? But you have the talent. They already know what's wrong. I need to talk to them, assure them I'm not pulling the earth out from under their feet, but we all have to collaboratively align, and we need to do that pretty quickly because your achievement gap among ELL, ESE, and that's articulated, I think, in goal 3 or 4 of that plan I put in front of you, those children's learning gains depend on it. And guess what? If you don't like the weather in Florida, or the education system in Florida, wait a little while and it'll change. They're both extremely consistent in change. So right now, you're at 63% proficient in ELA, and you're an A. Next year, and you're graded solely on proficiency. Next year, you're going to have half learning gains and third grade reading as 2 additional cells in the spreadsheet that calculates that grade. So you won't be at 63% if you don't change practice next year. So I've led that kind of change in Clay County. We used reading mastery, heavy phonics-based, proven, well-researched, 30-plus years of research It works. If you have programs and system in places that work, I'm not going to come in here and say I'm the new superintendent, I need to change them. But if everybody's literally not on the same page, some schools are using them and some schools aren't, or some schools aren't using enough phonics. Some of the programs you had have some phonics, but it's kind of like the difference between, lightly spreading butter on your bagel and slopping it with cream cheese. And you need a lot of phonics. And it takes sweat equity. It's going to take some teachers and coaches pushing in, pulling out. I hate to pull a kid out from the rest of their class. Every once in a while that's needed. But they have to have the right tools in their curriculum, and they have to have the right instructional materials, and they have to have the right supplements. And that's where you're going to change sometimes school to school or teacher to teacher based on that teacher's assessment of the child, because that teacher is going to know the best way path for these individual children. And I've led that change with great success around primary grades reading and around graduation rates. So what you do in secondary schools is different. Did that adequately answer your question, ma'am?
Yeah, I believe so. Are there any follow-ups? Okay, thank you. Mrs. Rose.
Yes. What can we expect from you as our superintendent in terms of communication and decision-making? Please provide examples of your ability to effectively communicate to different audiences.
Okay. So if you look at goal 1 and 2 in the plan, you'll see a pretty wide range of stakeholders that I will vigorously, being the key word there, engaging with. And as a board member, you will get tired the first 30 to 60 days of me calling you, because I'm not going to go where you don't want me to go. It's going to take a few meetings to understand the collective will of the board, and if you like the plans you have, if you don't like the plans you have, if we need to tweak or we need to rewrite. I'm very comfortable in my own skin. The good news is any communication that we do need to do and any strategic planning that we do need to do, I've already been well trained to do both. You won't have to outsource that and pay money for strategic plans and operational implementation, benchmarks, timeliness, or accountability. When you open the package that contains Charlie Van Zant, that's already in here, baked in. I couldn't get away from it if you want. I want to talk to you. I want to understand each and every one of you. I've already heard enough by watching your board meetings and our initial conversations. All of you want to close achievement gaps. All of you want children to be safe. All of you seem to want Sarasota to climb to be the #1 school district recognized in Florida. I'm a competitor at heart. I love to win. I promise you, I will not be the first superintendent to step in Sarasota County and lead you from an A to a B. Okay? If we can't get there from here, you will hear me early and often saying, ma'am, respectfully, I think we need to ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump. You will not be surprised at it, and you will have a lot of exhaustive communication. If I get invited somewhere to go interact, I will, and I may have already hit on that. Have I answered your question? I want to be respectful of everybody's time, or is there another tweak to this? Okay, I'll be quiet.
Okay. Mr. Edwards.
Describe a time you provided leadership around an issue that was considered controversial and had internal or external opposition. You're looking at me like, of course you got that question.
You want it operationalized in America, overseas? Where would you like this example? Because there's a few.
Give it to the school district.
How did you address the concerns, and what was the ultimate outcome?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you a hard one because I like to be very transparent. My secretary in Clay County, administrative assistant, lovely, lovely person, kept hovering outside my window. It was a closed window like that versus a window with a glass in it when I got there. I said, you got to put a glass in this door because all these ladies that work here, another story. But she kept coming in front of that window and waving at me. And I'm in a pretty important meeting with some people that I'd requested the meeting with. And so finally I said, hold on. So I went to her and I said, Karen, what is going on? She says, Mr. Van Zant, there's somebody sitting at my desk and you really need to talk to them and the CFO at your earliest opportunity. Like as soon as you wrap up, I'll go get whatever you want for lunch. You got to talk to this man. So as soon as I could wrap up, I invited him in. I invited our CFO in. And he explained to me that a very popular football coach at one of our 7 high schools had been on game nights, home game nights. They do what everybody else I've ever known to do. They go to Sam's or Big Lots and they buy drinks and Snickers bars and popcorn and they sell it, right? Well, at this particular high school, depending on who they were playing, there could be 4 or 5 cash boxes and 30 or 40 grand floating around that football field between 7 and 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. So this gentleman felt as me and a lot of people that have ever coached a sport did, that his assistant coaches weren't being compensated adequately. And, you know, I can show you in the math that we probably pay him about 18 cents an hour for a head football coach or head basketball coach, boys, or, you know, whatever. So what he was doing was he was going to the booster club, whoever was running the clubhouse, and grabbing a couple grand at home games out of the cash box. And then he was giving his own associate coaches cash bonuses on the spot quietly that he felt like they deserved. It violated every financial policy and regulation in Clay County School Board history. By the way, this gentleman was the son-in-law of a former maintenance director who employed my father as an architect up till '98 when I ran for the school board. We had built many Clay County School Board meetings. We had brought many ADA codes into compliance through his architectural firm. And he was wildly popular. People that I socialized with loved this man. So I brought in each board member. You got to come, we got to talk about this in person. And we talked about it. Every board member I had said, you must fire this gentleman. He had already confessed to it. I sent out my human resources director and my director of secondary to talk to him. I did it. I know it wasn't right, but they just needed more money. I don't remember what all his justifications were. This is all the way back to 2015, 2016. So at the board's request, all 5 of them, I put on the board agenda to fire him because the superintendent under our board policy did not have the right to fire somebody without a hearing the school board member or the school board acting as a collective body could. I heard from parents, from other coaches, from the professional union organizations, what a wonderful man this was. And at the end of all that discussion, the board chair says I bring it back to the board for a motion and a second and any further discussion. It was dead silence. So literally, the community at large, it was a packed boardroom, totally just got silent. The board just clammed up. So the motion died for lack of, it died for lack of any motion. So that was no fun. And I want to say that to you because I want you to understand clearly who I am. And, you know, maybe I would break that up into 2 board meetings now and make everybody say it out loud. I always try to keep you as board members from having to say what you don't want to say out loud. If it can be avoided and we can come to everybody's kind of, and I can, you know, bring something to you. Yeah, that whole situation stunk. I did the right thing. I sleep fine every night. That gentleman, as far as I know, is still working.
Can I ask a question? You did fire this individual?
No. The firing had by Clay County School Board policy belonged to the school board. I suspended him while it was investigated. He confessed to it, but the will of the community and his peers won the day, and there was not a motion made. You know, when you say, hey, here's motion number 1 on the agenda, somebody's got to move the item and somebody's got to second it. It did not happen.
Thank you. All right, Eddie? I'm good. Okay, thank you. Mr. Enos.
As our superintendent, what evidence will our community, parents and staff observe that will demonstrate that you are an effective leader for Sarasota County?
Okay, sir. Everything that needs to happen will be driven off data, feedback, every fact that I can find. I don't operate in the feeling realm, although everything we do is extremely personal and humane. You deal with people's children. They have and they should have very high expectations. But like I mentioned, the ELA numbers, we'll look at those numbers together, each one-on-one. We'll look at them collectively. If you follow into the goals 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the plan, we'll look at the things that I can see from the outside that I think that are likely issues. If my assessment through goals 1 and 2 of listening and learning and approaching all stakeholders are confirmed, I will bring to you recommendations to shore up all those achievement gaps, communication gaps, behavior and discipline gaps. And you will see by the end of the next school year, if I start, say, 1 July, those numbers, I'm not saying it's an overnight solution. There's no silver bullet. This is all hard work, sweat equity, leading by example, building trust, all the things we've already addressed. But you will see these things start to move slightly in the right direction. And by year 2, you'll see them move a little further. And when I leave, I'll leave you with just a graph that I only have in paper of my budget plan and our graduation rates. I threw away a lot of stuff last year. We sold our big house. Son moved out, became a firefighter. And the next one's going to school out of college in a year. So out of state to college in a year. So I downsized and threw away all my good boxes of files because I didn't think I was ever going to do this again.
I don't know how that is.
Thank you. Were there any follow-ups? If not, Mrs. Marinelli?
What importance do you place on standardized assessment results, and how do you leverage those results to evaluate programs and design staff development?
Okay, some great questions there to unpack. Since probably 98 or 99, whenever the FCAT entered Florida, we've had standardized assessments. And we had them before then, but that, they weren't so resounding for the state of Florida. So we have to follow the rules, follow the law, follow board policy, and take all the assessments. They are not the be-all, end-all, but they are, in fact, assessments. They give us a place to observe data, to plant our foot and pivot from. So they're extremely important. They're important to the economic engine of Sarasota County, Florida. As I mentioned before, if we come in here and let it drop to a B because we don't act upon the data that we have, we would be negligent and be abdicating our duties. The superintendent, whether elected or appointed, has specific duties outlined in Florida statute, and you have specific duties, and we all know what those are, and I've been a school board member and a superintendent. But there are other pieces to the picture. It could be that the reason your data dashboard doesn't look like we like it is because you've been so good for so long, and the affluent children that are Caucasian are doing well and making enough 4s and 5s that when I read your data without being able to talk to anybody of consequence yet in the trenches, in the classrooms every day, it appears if you pulled that one demographic out, every other subgroup is really having a struggle. So we're going to listen and learn, but we're not doing that for a year. We're doing that for the first several weeks, maybe 60 days. And when I come to you, it's not like that's step 1 and then this is step 2. I enumerated those. I probably just should have put little arrow points. All of this is going on all at the same time. So we have to synchronize all operations. We have to build the structures and framework and systems if they don't already exist, where there's a common operating picture. Everybody understands what the expectations are. They understand the benchmarks. For years we called them Florida standards that they have to hit. They understand in their own ranks, in their own school buildings, what students aren't hitting them. They understand that we're going to shift to a strong research-based, phonics-based curriculum. I give heavy emphasis on primary grades reading because nothing else you want to happen for a child happens if you don't get that done. And so at the same time we're working on that, we have to go into the middle schools and the high schools and work with those kids, just like when I taught junior high, that still couldn't read because they couldn't do anything else. Those were my disruptions in class. And we have to build systems around the high schoolers that don't look like they're going to graduate with coaches and going down into the eaches. You have to check each nut and bolt in the whole tool chest and see who's not getting where they need to go and surround them with a plethora of supports. But those supports can't just be Miss Smith or Mr. Jones's down at the high school levels, what they like to use in the 80s. It's all not that simple by far. Did that adequately answer the question? Okay.
Thank you. Special education is a complex challenge for our district. What do you believe to be the best approach to ensuring that our students with needs are appropriately educated?
Well, each one of them has an individual education plan, right? If it's not aligned to your reading plan, if it's not aligned to grade level expectations, that's the first thing we have to shore up, and I'll know that pretty quickly if you invite me down here to be your superintendent. So if you look at goal 4, you have a huge achievement gap going the wrong direction among your students with special capabilities, special needs, ESE, however you want to term it. It's not happening now. There are some underlying reasons that it's not happening. I don't know all of them. Again, I can only see what's publicly available. But they need to have inclusive scheduling. They need to have general education collaboration, high expectations. I can't hit that one enough. You know, we really hurt children when we don't expect great things out of them and equip the teachers around them to give them that academic excellence. If we have an 8th grader reading on 3rd grade level and that's just what we've learned to expect out of little Johnny, man, we are not helping little Johnny, all right? So if that's going on in some areas, we need to lead through that. And kind of tying in everything, every question you guys have asked me, I lead professional development for the administrators. My last job at FORSCOM headquarters, I had responsibility for a slice of human resources for the Army. That slice was about 750,000 of the entire Army, Guard, Active Duty, and Reserve, policy, personnel, and programs. So I say that humbly, but I say that I've gotten pretty good over the years at inspecting things and looking for benchmarks and building plans to close gaps, whether they were in achievement or flight standards or whatever. And again, I cannot stress enough. I truly believe that you have talented people here. A lot of them already know what they should be doing, and for whatever reason, they don't have the right support or resource system, or they're all maybe told to pick their own. I don't know, but I can find out pretty quickly. We can standardize and align that, and then we can shut these gaps down, because every child in any subgroup, especially special needs, should have high expectations and the right supports to get them where we all want them to go.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Rose.
Yes, thank you. We are very interested in improving upon our status as a very good school district. We also know that it will take hard work and commitment to address our areas of weakness. What are some ideas that you have that could be worth exploring as we strive to create better futures for our students?
Well, you have been very good for a long time. You have every potential, resource-wise, talent-wise, board governance and leadership-wise, to be the #1 district in Florida. You asked me on the video question why I was interested in Sarasota County. Part of that answer is because of the resolve that you've already actioned, because you understand that it takes leadership to get you there. You understand your role as a board member. You understand the superintendent's role. Many of you, when we talked, were not thrilled with your current strategic plan. Everybody had some different ways of work they would like to go about. Reading Mastery in Clay County, heavy phonics-based, well-researched program. That's what I used to get our third graders reading on grade level, which they did in spades. Graduation rates, they skyrocketed with appropriate leadership. I mentioned Governor Scott before. Governor DeSantis is a different animal, and 2 years later we'll have another governor, and things will tweak again. But when I wanted to build the infrastructure to have a world-class CTE program, which we did, now we were just south of Duval County, and we had 3-to-1 the industry certifications completed, and they were 5 times our size roughly. Okay, so I wrapped everything that we wanted, because we needed money. You don't need more money. You need strong leadership, and you need leadership that is trustworthy, and you need leadership with integrity, but most importantly, beyond those, you need leadership with consistency that will appropriately benchmark, set timelines, set goals, and then hold people accountable. And I forget your original question. I apologize. Getting to number 1. Was that it?
Basically, what you were covering is us going from, covering Sarasota County going from the status of very good to a higher status, and the hard work it would take addressing our areas of weakness, and what would be worth exploring. What would you strive to create? You're on the right track.
Okay. Well, in everything that I do, I'm always trying to raise achievement, elevate. There's lots of nice, cool educational words. But if you want to come up with a logo, mine in Clay County was innovate, engage, and empower. That's what I had across my letterhead by my name and the board member's name, because we innovated processes and procedures. We empowered the leaders with everything they needed, to include the tools, the equipment, and then we resourced them. After the empowerment, we engaged, and I articulated in goals 1 and 2 how I would go to every stakeholder group, every group within the system, administrator, school-based, district-based, and down to the teacher and teacher leader level to elevate Sarasota, if that's what we want to call it, just for the sake of conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Van Zandt, as superintendent, what would your first 60 to 90 days on the job look like?
Well, I think I've already said it. It may have been to the community group. If you Google Superintendent's 100-Day Action Plan, the first 2, there's only so many ways to say you're going to go meet everybody you possibly can, listen to everybody's concerns, and develop a better communication plan to address those. If you look at goals 3 through 6, those go into ESE, ELL, and I ought to look at my own plan since I took the time to write it. Your information services plan, your number 5, I'm going to be in that with both feet day 1. You've got some vulnerabilities there that I'm not going to express publicly, but if certain people took advantage of those, you would not like it. I've heard enough of your board meetings and workshops to hear you express that your behaviors and discipline, and whether to pull kids out of learning or what you're going to do with them, you all seem to have some concerns about that. I've tried to hit those on goal 6. I had some great success, and I hate to pull kids out of their class, but if they're so disruptive that everybody else in the class can't learn, if they strike an employee, they bring a weapon to school, they got to go. And depending on the degree of severity, it might be a quarter, a semester, a year. Could be an absolute expulsion, which another county would uphold, okay, if they're selling drugs on your campus. So there has to be a clear, articulated student code of conduct and a lot of accountability. And I've got to get into all these areas with all the people that run them immediately. So that first 60 days, you're seeing a synchronized effort on these actions, unless you offer me the job and say, hey, Mr. Van Zandt, we need to talk to you about your action plan, because 4 out of the 6 things you put in here are really where we're hurting, but you're missing these 2, so add those to the mix or something along those lines. So I think I've addressed the most painful areas from my conversations with each of you and what I can publicly access.
Thank you. I'm going to have a quick follow-up on that. I think during our 30-minute Zoom, if you will, you had mentioned, you recognize that any superintendent coming in is right at the beginning of the school year, so making those first couple days, a couple of months impactful. And you had mentioned having, I may say this incorrectly, but a
Transition team?
transition team, which
Thank you.
was unique to anything else that I think I'd heard. And so I was
Okay.
hoping you could elaborate about that.
Sure. So what I would like to do is not bring a busload of people in here and cause reoccurring expenses on your budget. From what I can see, your budget is a bright spot. Your audit report, very clean. Again, I can only look in from the outside. I watched your budget workshop. Your CFO seems very articulate. So I don't see a big issue there. However, you've got these ESSER dollars. I heard y'all talk about them a lot. And we have to expend the rest of those and know they're not coming back, right? And any other non-reoccurring issues. So what I would like to do is pull some friends out of retirement. I don't know if they'll come. You have to offer me the job. I haven't offered jobs to a job I don't have. So I'd like to bring a 60 to 90 to now till Christmas transition team that's going to cost you some money, but hopefully one-time money. Now, I will ask you to bring 2 or 3 people that I trust to help me synthesize everything, and they're still working, and they're going to want a job in the FRS. That's just reality. But I would like to have a crisp, concise, not very big transition team. How many people will be willing to come out of retirement and stop golfing, playing with their grandkids, fishing, whatever they're doing? I honestly don't know. But that would be my first approach. There might be people here that you already know. There might have been some in that 15-member panel that are thinking about a transition that know a lot about the school system. I don't know, but I will find those people and to the extent possible, not burden you with additional reoccurring cost.
Thank you very much. Mr. Enos.
And that goes right into this question. What has been your approach to budget development, and how can we assure that the district priorities are being met?
Okay. So my approach to budget is to do the things that we collectively agree and prioritize. They might not be all the same things that you are doing. Okay? So if we agree that your primary grades reading programs, closing the achievement gap, expanding pre-K, I don't know if everybody wants to do that, but the only surprise I had out of my initial 5 conversations with the group last week was how few pre-K classrooms that you have. And that has such a significant factor in early childhood literacy. That was surprising. I'll leave that at that. There may be a reason for it. But how we measure success in that, everything I bring to you will have a timeline, a benchmark to meet or a standard to meet within that timeline, and it will all have accountability measures built in. I've spent my entire life as a senior officer doing inspection programs, doing inspector general evaluations. I would have rather been flying, I promise you. But I got the reputation for stewarding resources and figuring out what went wrong where, and, so I had to do that as a school superintendent because I did not have abundant resources to do everything with, so I had to prioritize and focus. And like I said, once I went to the board with a reasonable plan of action addressing everybody's collective concerns, every budget I presented, every academic program I presented, they were all 5-0 votes. But I won't bring you a budget that doesn't have, did we hit it? I won't ask you for a slush fund. We will have goals and priorities, and the budget will reflect those goals and priorities. And whatever non-reoccurring money that we have, I would use that towards a transition, towards building capacity in teachers, towards professional development. I had to go lean when I didn't have more money. So that meant as administrators retired from the district, some of them had to shift and go back out to schools. Some of the reading specialists and instructional specialists at the district had to go back to schools. So I had about a 7% attrition rate among my administrative and instructional ranks in like 14, 15, 16, and most of that was retirement. But as I did that, if, say, 3 of you were working in the instructional division and Miss Rose says, I'm out, I'm retiring this year, I'm at the end of my drop, Ms. Ziegler and Ms. Marinelli's job description just got a little longer, because you have to make those decisions sometimes if you want to prioritize that effort. And the state of Florida loves to rack and stack everybody, and by the time I left office, we were ranked second in Florida for dollars spent in the classroom. Did that? Okay.
Thank you. Mrs. Marinelli.
Academics, athletics, and the arts often compete for a school's resources. What is the relative importance of each, and how might a district find the proper balance between them and the many other funding priorities?
Well, first and foremost, you have to do academics right. Saying that, it would be hard for me to get my 17-year-old out of bed if there weren't athletics. My little sister, it was band. She was a drum major. So was my mother. My dad, very musically inclined. During the recession, during my predecessor's time, he went to each elementary school and said, what do you want to give up, PE, art, or music? Oh my gosh. You got to have those co-curriculars, because every child is intrigued with something other than reading or writing and arithmetic, right? So in that prioritized budget, in the money that I did not have, I had to go in and nudge academics. Sometimes that looked like 1 or 2 more children in a class of English or math. I had to differentiate instruction at the elementary schools even sometimes to make all this balance. But by the time I left office, we had the required savings account, fund balance. Every school had music, art, and PE. And I don't think Sarasota is in any financial jeopardy that I can see of not being able to sustain those programs. And I think we would be hard-pressed among your schools to find a school that says, we don't need music. We don't even like art. I don't see that here. So they're all vitally important, and whatever motivates a student, we have to not do what each and every student wants, but we have to find a way to motivate every learner if we want them all to learn. And those co-curricular and extracurricular activities you mentioned are all key components to having a complete child.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to finalize, so I have one more question, and then there will be some time for you to share anything additional that we didn't cover in our questions, and then if you have any questions for us, and then certainly the opportunity to finalize and with concluding thoughts. So my question is, we have often heard that education in our state and county and across the country has become too political. How will you, as our superintendent, work to ensure that you are leading in an apolitical manner?
Okay, great question. If I wanted to have anything to do with politics, running for office, supporting others running for office, I would be doing it. And I have not for several years now. My calling has always been to support students and or soldiers and their families. And they have a bunch of similar needs. And that's still where I find myself today. When you guys run for school board, don't call me and ask for a check. I had to do that a lot. It's not happening. Don't ask me to go somewhere and go to a Democrat, RPOF, libertarian function and rally the crowd for you. I'm not doing that either. I don't want to have anything to do with that. I've been there. I've got that T-shirt. I've been to the desert. I have a lot of brown T-shirts. I don't need any more of any of that. I can support students. I can support your community. I can support your collective vision and act on it once this board has lawfully met, advertised in the sunshine. I will go to all the rubber chicken dinners. I want to go to them. I prefer barbecue or fish, but anyway, I want to be part of this community, and I don't want to be part of the political landscape here. So I don't know how any other plain communication to say that, but you know, at any any point we collectively reach an impasse on that, then I'll offer to get out of your way and let you do something else.
Thank you. Are there any follow-ups? Seeing none, this will be the moment. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the board? Do you have any questions for us? And then we'd love to hear your final statement or closing thoughts.
Okay. So what was the very first thing before closing thoughts?
Was there anything? So I know it's been a long day, so thank you very much. If there's anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to share with us, to make sure this is your opportunity, and the public also, to make sure that if we didn't ask you a question, that there's something you wanted to make sure you were able to share with us.
Are you guys satisfied with the safety and security that you currently have with all the systems you have in place?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. And please don't take offense if I get into all those plans with all those people that implement those with both feet, because I've had some days I never want to have again, okay? Mm-hmm. So understand that and where I'm coming from. I really don't have anything else to ask you. I feel like we've made great headway as humans in the past 5-6 days here. I understand where you are to the greatest extent I can. I am excited to learn more about where you are. I think I understand where you want to go. If I saw any reason you couldn't elevate or even become the #1 school district in Florida, I would tell you at this time so you would know coming in and not be surprised. I don't see any of those. And really, to me, every job I've ever had is all about relationships. So let me just share what a little bit about me in my closing statement. You have a vision broad enough to incorporate every learner in your district and every family in your district. You have a mission that's also fairly general. I have not seen all of the systems that I think would be necessary to operationalize both of those. I feel very confident I can bring that to you. That's why I'm drawn here. I think I can actually be helpful. The most important relationship I have here on this earth is with my wife. We celebrate 29 years this summer. Are y'all going to be at the thing tonight? So you'll get to meet Stephanie. My two sons, I'm very, very proud of. One of them's 20, and he's a firefighter in Jacksonville, Florida. So he's rookie year with the city of Jacksonville as a firefighter EMT. And my youngest one's a state championship weightlifter, and he would run through that brick wall for any of you. Loves to play football, loves to hit things. Not people, unless they're in pads. Very, very proud of those family members. And my mother and father both taught briefly before my mother passed. So this is in my blood. This is who I am. I don't know any more clear way to expose myself personally to you. I believe in the work that you've done. I believe you can get where you want to go. I don't have any other thing taking up my time and attention. I'll have to reshuffle some things in Clay County to come down here. But I look forward to getting in to Sarasota with both feet and being your next school superintendent. So any alibis, any of that?
I don't see any comments or questions, so I want to take this opportunity. Thank you so much for your time, for your interest, for your candidness. And I had mentioned there will be a open house for the community from 6 to 8 at Pineview, which you mentioned you'll be there. And I know some of our board members will also be there in attendance, and it'll be a great opportunity for you to get face-to-face time with many of our community members. So thank you so much for your time, and then we will see you this evening.
Yes, ma'am. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are no additional thoughts, I know it's been a long day, but appreciate all the work. Mrs. Tompkins, thank you. Craig, thank you. You guys did a great job helping us today. And if that is it, and they're without objection, we stand adjourned.
Was the gentleman that took the stuff up there, want to take this up here, and can I? Okay, so they're 2x2. I don't even know which ones are my originals anymore.